Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third annual Location Managers Guild of America panel on location scouting for Hollywood movies. We're going to show you a quick 2-minute sizzle reel of some of the work that this group here has done, and then afterwards we will introduce ourselves. So let's watch the trailer. Of course, the music from that was Mad Max Fury Road, which had some incredible on-location filming, but sadly none of us were part of that one. So as I mentioned, my name is Scott Trimble, and I have been a location scout for 16 years. I started out in San Francisco, and I eventually went to Los Angeles. I've done a lot of science fiction movies, but I've also done television, commercials, even theme park rides and video games, anything that requires on-location filming. I've been part of the Location Managers Guild of America since it was incorporated in '03. I was a founding member and a former board member, and we've been doing this panel for 3 years. This is Steve Woroniecki, and he will tell you a little bit about himself too.
Oh, okay, thanks. Thanks everyone for showing up. I really appreciate it. Love being here, the board as well, and thanks Scott for setting this up. My background is mostly in, I was a commercial producer. The economy tanked in 2007, and I got into locations on a feature. Scott was actually there as well in the same movie with Star Trek, and I've been doing it ever since, and been really fortunate and blessed to be working mainly on very big features.
Stacey McGillis.
Hello, thanks everyone for coming, and thank you again, Scott, for setting it up. I've been in the business location scouting since about 10 years ago. And I've worked on large feature films, commercials, television, stills, pretty much, like Scott said, anything that requires on-location photography or filming.
Kei Rowan-Young.
Hi, thank you, Scott. I've been a location scout working in locations since about 1998, and I worked on lots of romantic comedies and bigger features that don't usually involve flipping buses on a bridge, though.
And Stephenson Crossley.
Hi, thank you guys for coming out. I guess I started in locations. I was an assistant director first and got tired of dealing with actors. And so I segued into locations, and I've always been obsessed with architecture, so it was a nice fit. And photography, I think, is the only class I got an A in high school. So So that's it, and I do big features sometimes, but usually smaller ones because I like them better, and the people seem to be nicer, to me at least, and TV as well. I kind of bounce back and forth, but I always find it interesting.
And Nick Carr.
Hi, my name is Nick Carr. I've been a location scout based out of New York City for 10 years. My first movie was War of the Worlds, the Steven Spielberg movie. And I got into location scouting because it was the only job available. And I remember when I got the job, I thought location sounded like, of all the different departments, sounded like the most boring department you could join. And what I hope you guys take away from what we're going to talk about today is it's actually one of the best departments you can work in on a movie. If you want an education in the movies, get hired in a locations department and you will learn everything you need to know about becoming a filmmaker.
Never boring.
Never boring.
So today's panel, I'm going to ask some questions of everybody up here, and we will then have a quick slideshow presentation by Nick, and then we will have questions from the audience. So we're going to begin, though, with the basics. Like, what is it exactly that a location scout does? So Kei, can you please talk a little bit about the process from receiving the script to what you go through in order to choose the places that get filmed at?
Right. When you get hired as a location scout or location manager, you read through the script, and it's your job basically to go give the directors and the designers and the producers as many choices as possible for each location that is scripted, whether it be a restaurant or a rocky mountain or a river or whatever. As a manager or as a scout, you will just go out and hopefully with a good camera, take many photographs, present them to the creative end of things, let them go through the process of choosing, and you just begin the narrowing down from there. Is that more or less? Begin the narrowing down after all the locations have been chosen. We then take over the management side of things, and we do everything. What I like to say is, the circus is coming to town, and we have to handle everything from parking the elephants and putting up the big tent to cleaning up the elephant poop afterwards. So that involves getting permits, doing contracts with each of the locations, and ordering everything from the dumpsters and any kind of shaded area to feed the 100+ crew members and cast, to making sure everything gets broken down and taken care of all along the way, while negotiating with the surrounding community to make sure that you're there as a guest in their community, as opposed to somebody who comes in and takes over, as it were. And it's our job to liaise between the community and the production company while still keeping everything moving forward. Is that it?
Okay, so that's the scouting process, where we basically drive around, take pictures, travel, meet people, and you'll often see things on the internet describing this as the Hollywood dream job, because it is pretty awesome. Yeah, we do love doing that, but there's a lot of challenges with this too. So Stephenson, can you talk about some of the flip side of it, particularly in regards to once we're starting to prep and film? What are some of the challenges that we have to face?
The glamour, you mean all the glamour that's involved?
Yes.
The challenge is, as Kei said, it's that we're in front of an army that's coming. Whether or not you want it to, it's going to show up. And so we just have to be prepared logistically to have all that in place. And it's all about relationships, like so much in life, and making sure that everyone, if you're shooting a neighborhood, for instance, that they're informed when you're going to be there, what you're going to be doing, so they don't step out their front door and see a whole bunch of zombies or people shooting each other and, freak out, understandably. Often we're shooting late hours and into the night, and we're putting large generators in front of people's houses, and like you said, we're putting tents up in the neighbor's yard. And for me, the best part of it is to invite everybody to be as much of the part of the process as possible without actually interrupting the process. But what was the question? It's the challenges. No, I know. It's the challenges, and then it's the crew. And a crew treats location, unfortunately, very often, because we work a lot on stage and on a movie lot, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. That you have places that are controlled environment and big ceilings and all the stuff right there at their fingertips. You take that same crew very often the next day and put them into a neighborhood, and they tend to treat the environment as if it's a backlot and as if they're still on stage and not having, so we have to, a lot of it is training the people that we work with to try and treat an environment that isn't the stage, and a lot anymore, with the respect that it deserves. So I would, everyone always comes up to me and says, oh, how can you deal with an angry neighbor? And I'm like, angry neighbors are fine. They usually just haven't been informed, don't know what's going on, and are afraid. But it's the crew is the hard part to deal with, because they're the ones who are gonna, scratch a 300-year-old floor, which happened to me, by dragging a C-stand across it, which is a big metal, like one of these type of stands. Or just be, rude to a neighbor to that point where they then call the police, and then that whole thing blows up. So that's, for me, that's the biggest challenge, is try to get everybody on board as a part of the same team. We have the same goal in mind, even though there's lots of different separate departments and they all live in their own little world. To bring all those worlds, a location manager really needs to be able to facilitate communication across all those different little worlds and different departments, so that everybody's on the same page and can approach things in a respectful way in order to get the work done that you need to accomplish.
One thing I might add to that is the poop, because for months we're planning all this stuff ahead of time, making $100,000 deals and setting up everything from the mayor and city council all the way down to be allowed to film there, but it's all invisible to the rest of the crew. Once we arrive there on set, all they know is, oh, the outhouse is plugged up, and call the location manager. So that's the flip side, to what we do. A lot of the respect, they don't see everything that had gone into everything prior.
A lot of times, I always think that if you've done your job right as a locations person, you'll have done it all in advance. You'll have gotten your permits, you'll have gotten your holding and catering, you'll have truck parking. If everything goes according to plan, then you should be able to just be on set and just kind of stand there and observe and make sure everything goes according to plan. So a lot of times, other crew guys on set will look at you like, why is this guy getting paid to do anything? I mean, he's just standing there. Now, of course, this is not the case. Stuff always goes wrong. There's always fires to put out. But I think we arguably have one of the most misunderstood jobs in film, because we do everything behind the scenes before anybody shows up on day one.
If you're doing your job well, you look like the laziest person on set.
Your job basically is to sit there and wait for the potty to clog so that you can get it unclogged. If that's the only thing I have to do on a set, that's amazing.
A really funny, I was working on the Spielberg movie Munich, and a typical locations job that you're not expecting to come along was someone starts playing saxophone in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden you hear over the walkie-talkie, locations, someone's playing saxophone, go pay them to stop. So now you get your whole locations team, and you're running up and down the streets of Brooklyn trying to suss out this sax player. We find the guy, you give him $50, you say, hey buddy, listen, just don't play the saxophone for 2 hours. And he goes, fine, great, $50. And then you'll hear over the walkie-talkie, Steven actually likes the saxophone. Could we pay him to continue playing? And it's those kind of things. We do everything, we predict it in advance as best we can, but it's those kind of things on set that make our job exciting in a way.
Right, because one of, in going back to what it is we do too, that our job involves making sure the crew, the camera guys, the grips, the electricians, the transportation guys, everybody can just walk on to a location and do their job, what they are supposed to do, without having to worry about asking, can I, am I allowed to stand here? Am I allowed to be here? Hopefully you've set it up where they can stand there, they can put their camera there, they can set a light on that rooftop. Everything's good to go, let's go. Hopefully, if everything is planned well, you've got it set up for them and you just sort of open the doors for them to do that. You can just let it happen and they don't have to worry about every little thing to do their job.
Well, they're going to do it anyway, so it's better to have it planned out ahead of time.
All right, so Stacey McGillis is based in the Orlando region, and you primarily work on movies that film all over the state of Florida. So for people out there who are not based near any hubs like LA, New York, Atlanta, what kind of advice would you give in regards to starting out in locations close to where they live now?
Well, I get that question a lot, and my first piece of advice is to reach out to most places, whether you know it or not, have a local film commission, even if it's very small, and it's usually a part of your economic development commission. For me in Orlando, it's the Orlando Economic Development Commission and the Orlando Film Commission, and they're generally extremely helpful. They usually have a small database of crew members, resources, and things like that, and you can list yourself with them and say, hey, here's my resume, I'm interested in doing this. And then when a production comes to town, the production reaches out to the Economic Development Commission or to the Film Commission themselves and says, hey, do you have crew members here? And if you do, who are they? And the Film Commission then forwards your information to them, and then they kind of hook up with you. So that's a good way to do it. And if you don't have a Film Commission, you can always sort of try to reach out to one of the local colleges that has a film school and say, hey, look, I'm interested in being a part, even though I'm not a part of the college. Maybe if you guys are doing a short film, I can help you find locations or things like that. And that's a good way to get your foot in the door, a good way to get some experience.
All right, now Steve Woroniecki, as he mentioned briefly earlier, was a commercial producer, and then he made the transition to becoming an assistant location manager. So he dropped all the way back down and then worked his way back up in the feature film world in locations. So Steve, can you talk about making a transition, whether it's from a different part of the film industry or from a different career entirely? What would you recommend for switching later in life into locations?
Okay. Boy, I guess, well, my situation was the economy went bad, so I resorted to begging, so I don't know if that qualifies. But it was a semi-natural, because I was in the industry of film. Commercials is a separate industry, TV is a separate industry, and features are a separate industry. If you're lucky, I know Stephenson jumps around Kei, and if you can jump between the two, it's fantastic, because you can keep your paychecks coming in. Our work is in blocks of time, so they don't all go together. So a feature might be 6 to 9 months to a year, but after that, you've been away from people that are working in the industry, so you might be out of the circuit of what's going on, and then you have to get back in, so you have to start calling. And if it's a TV show, they only start at certain times of the year, and if you miss that, you might miss out on being in that. So kind of lining them all up. But to get into the business, out of a town, an economic development isn't really an option for us. They don't call, there's no place to call and say, hey, I need a location person, as much as it's kind of within our industry. You would call one of these people here, you'd call a location manager, you'd call an assistant location manager, which you can look on IMDb, which is the movie website. It kind of tells you where everything is. You can kind of do research on the internet of who's in your town. If it's Los Angeles or San Diego, you can find out through different services, but pretty easy to find out who are the working location people, because they're always at the back end of a show or a back end of a movie. And that's probably your best bet. It might seem a little arduous to try to get a hold of them, and then just repeatedly go after them. Like I said, I had to resort to begging, but begging means just calling people over and over and over and over again. And that seems to be in any position that you want in Hollywood. You just got to keep hammering them. And then it's not the first job, it's actually not the noise. It's the second job that you want to get. So once you get your first job, you can't lay back and say, wow, I'm in. You got to start fighting for the next one. So you got to keep calling and calling and calling and just bugging people like crazy. So you have to be a hustler, I guess, would be the best answer to the question.
Yeah, of course, there's a fine line between asking too much and asking not enough, and you got to weigh it out. And part of the job is reading people. We have to do that out on the streets when we're trying to get locations. And you got to read the people you're reaching out to for work. You don't want to bug them and have them not hire you. But some people need the reminders. We're all very busy people, so it doesn't hurt to write to somebody again a couple of months later and see if they have anything for you then.
I would just add that in terms of changing careers, because I changed from being an AD, I think it was 32, and into locations, and I took a lot of the same skills that I used as an AD, and they transferred over into locations. So even though it may seem like you would have to start all the way at the beginning again, you really don't. You can really apply and move up much faster into whatever you've decided to do that's different and using a lot of the same skills. And locations is sink or swim. I mean, you either do it or you don't, and if you don't, then you don't get another job. So, which is brutal and wonderful. But I don't ever work with a bad person twice, so.
Uneligible for rehire.
Yeah, they just kind of disappear from the industry.
We do have the freedom to choose in what we do.
So years ago, I tried to blog about location scouting, and it only lasted a couple of years until '08. And so these days, I just tweet. My problem was that I was hampered by all the non-disclosures and the studio secrecy, so the tweets are better because I'm not hindered by having to go on and explain, because they're kept short. But Nick Carr, on the other hand, has been very successful with his own blog, which is called Scouting New York. So Nick, can you please talk about your blog, and please also talk a few words about social media in general and how it relates to what we do?
Sure. I started a website 6 years ago called Scouting New York. You can check it out at scoutingny.com. And what I try to do is, what I found, and I'm sure everybody else up here has found it too, is as a locations person, you cover the same territory frequently. You go up and down the same streets over and over again. What I found in New York City was I kept seeing all these really cool little hidden gems, things that you'd walk by every day without, that most people walk by every day without noticing. And I think just the nature of our job is to pay attention. We're location scouts. We got to find great locations. We are supposed to pay attention. So I started writing about them, and I started writing about just the unusual and interesting places that we get to visit that most people aren't allowed to go to. I've written about things like there's in New York City, there's a guy who has built a beach house on top of his 5-story apartment building. So you'll see this little 5-story brick building, and if you look at the top, it's got clapboards, it's got a little windmill at the top. It literally looks like someone took a beach house and put it on top of the building. So I like to write about things like that and really just spread the word of the locations, what locations is, since not too many people know about it. And it's sort of grown into a larger thing. And what I've found really helps about it is it has allowed me to reach out to a broader base when I'm looking for something that I have no idea where to find it. So for example, I was working on a TV show. They needed the equivalent of a 7-Eleven that wasn't a 7-Eleven. They couldn't do 7-Eleven because 7-Eleven would never sign off. I think a bunch of people get shot in the place. So 7-Eleven's not going to sign off on that. So you got to find the mom and pop version of a 7-Eleven. But most of those sort of drive-up places in New York City, you don't find those. You don't find the nice parking lot in front of it. Most of the time, they're gas stations, and shut down a gas station is, at least in New York, is at least $20,000 to $50,000 for a single day, and that's now too much money. So being able to reach out to people and say, hey, listen, what do you drive by every day? What's your local mom and pop 7-Eleven? And get that kind of feedback has really helped me find places that I never knew existed. And it's sort of I guess as an aside to that, if you're all aspiring filmmakers, you want to do something, you want to make your own film, I would definitely say that knowing a location before you write your script, having the location in mind is definitely a benefit. If you don't know where to find it and you're doing something on the low budget, you're doing something cheap, you're going to run into problems trying to figure out a way to do it for an affordable price. So writing around locations you have access to is definitely a good way to start where we're coming from.
I mean, I would talk to them before you even go start writing and see whether or not they would let you film there. It doesn't hurt to go backwards.
Yeah.
So Stephenson, you've worked on a lot of projects from big science fiction to series television to lower budget, haunted house, horror movies. How would you say our jobs as location scouts and managers are the same or different on all of these different level projects, and how do you adjust to working on them?
I would say that you really adjust. For me, I compartmentalize the whole thing. So it's always the same for me, except that I'm overseeing more balls in the air, call it. So on a larger project, I'll hire a lot more people, and then I'll oversee each one of them. Each person will have, say a few locations that they're running, and I will supervise that. And so on a larger feature, I might have, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different, people managing different locations, and I'll kind of supervise that. Obviously, I can't be as involved in each of those locations on something larger, and on something smaller, then it might just be me and an assistant, and I'm more involved with, those locations from beginning to end. But the actual job itself is always the same in terms of it involves, a lot of the stuff that Kei said earlier, the people, the relationships, working with the crew. It's just you ramp it up, with the people, and then you ramp it back down. But the job itself is the same.
And now to take that to another level, Steve Woroniecki here has worked on some very big movies, such as Star Trek Into Darkness and Iron Man 2 and X-Men First Class and Tomorrowland. So what about these very big projects? What additional challenges are there in regards to either being on location or dealing with the studio?
How much time do we have? I guess to take off a little bit, one issue is when you do go into someone's house or a new business or someone who's never had filming, and they're like, oh, that sounds fantastic. We thought that's so neat. And then you have to kind of talk them down where you say you're bringing the circus. So, someone there is thinking, oh, are you bringing like a crew of 2 or 3, like a news crew? And under your breath, you're like, no, about 250 people. You have to get them up to speed. So on the bigger features, I think my first location had 450 test and hanger, 450 extras, 250 crew. So that's a lot of people and you have to have tents, porta potty, you have to have the whole thing. So I'd say the scale is the biggest concern we all have in making sure your crew knows about scale. Commercials tend to shoot at a certain building. TV expands it a little bit, maybe down the street. And then features, you need the whole city. 360 everywhere. So it's a big, massive scale that you're dealing with. You're dealing with multiple buildings. It's just a bigger scale. And then for us, I think what we've dealt with, the hardest thing we deal with is secrecy. Because of the internet, if anything gets released, one scene, one actor, one picture, one outfit, especially Star Trek, it could blow the whole movie. So they will lose millions or make millions based on who knows or doesn't know what the story's about. So for us, everything's coded. The first Star Trek was it's Western?
Yeah, Western
coded as a
themes,
Western.
and the second one is Manhattan,
so
New
you'd
York
be
theme.
talking about the Enterprise, and they'd say the saloon, and you'd be like, wait, what's the saloon?
Yeah, the saloon.
So it's coding movies is tough to, you're trying to go as fast as you can. So the coding of the movies, the secrecy, making sure nobody knows about it. Even when you go to a location, trying to tell them, hey, you can't tell Aunt Susie back in Kansas that this is going on. You have to really be secret. You sign NDAs, but you can't really trust everybody. So I'd say the secrecy of a movie, that's the hardest thing to keep in because you're on it for a year. One little slip, one little picture, you never know what's going to get out. So we have teams and banks of people trying to, someone with a long les that can shoot, 1,000 feet away or even, a mile away, whatever it is, trying to safeguard that. Those are the big concerns. Dealing with the studio, dealing with politics, all the people. I could go on and forever, but I would say making sure someone understands when they say yes to your filming that you've got a lot of elephants coming in the house. And then the scale, the size of it to explain and actually getting all the contracts done, and the secrecy is the hardest by far. One wrong email sent, making sure everyone just keeps it under wraps would be, I'd say, the hardest thing.
Of course,
if it's so difficult to explain to someone to really get across to them how big the circus is. It is almost impossible. It doesn't matter how much you tell them, it doesn't matter how much detail you go into. When the circus arrives, they are shocked. It doesn't matter. And so it's really important that you try your best to get that across, because if you don't, and the circus arrives and they're just dumbfounded, as opposed to a little bit shocked, you might have a problem.
It's like trying to explain to people what it's going to be like, in the main hall on Saturday at Comic-Con. It's just, when you just pick up the phone for me on Saturday and call someone and try to describe it to them. That's what our job is like when we go to a location.
But it's so important that you do. It's so important you do, because so much of our job is about trust. You're knocking on somebody's door, or you're entering their place of business. You have to be the upfront person and give them as much information as possible. As much as you don't want to scare anybody away, you really want this location or whatever like that, you have to tell them what's about to happen, because you're about to sign contracts and you're about to, let all these people come in and move everything around or paint or whatever. And once that ball starts rolling, it can't stop. So they have to be they have to be prepared and on board with what's about to go down.
I usually get right up to the point where I'm going to scare them away. Pretty much every time. I start with, we're going to come into your house, we're going to break things,
Right.
we're going to scratch your floors, we may put a hole in a wall, and there's going to be, 400 people, even if it's going to be 100 people, I tell them 400 because it's much better. And
We really wanna shoot
then they're still shocked when it arrives. I was like, it's going to be trucks all over your street, your neighbor's going to hate you, and
But there will be great food.
there'll be great food, and it's really fun, and, Angelina Jolie's going to be in your kitchen.
Yeah,
But,
bucket list.
exactly.
Bucket list.
And
Sorry
it's still
about
our
your
job
mantle.
to make sure it all ends up okay. I mean, as scary as it is during the process, by the time we're all done, everybody's got to be happy. We make sure that everything's repaired and that everybody's paid off, and that, ultimately we want to be welcomed back into the neighborhood. Because we go back to these places
We go
over
back
and
again
over.
and again, all the time. And even like the 300-year-old floor that we scratched in Louisiana with a diagonal scratch across it, we took out all of that wood and found old antique wood and bought it to the tune of $65,000 and redid the entire floor. So we break it and we fix it.
The idea is to prepare so that you can preempt, and
Yeah.
protect, so that you're not paying on the back end, but things happen. You've got 100 people trying to cram into a living room. There is some, expected wear and tear, and, you just have to, as honest as you are up front, you have to be honest on the back end and say, now we're about to plaster, patch, and you get a fresh coat of paint.
And
Voila.
it happens. We had just finished that room. We had taken up we'd taken up the protective boarding that we put down. We did a whole shoot, and nothing had been damaged. And it was roped off. And one guy with a C-stand decided to move the rope and drag the C-stand across the floor.
We don't own that? We don't own that?
Yeah, we don't. What do you mean I couldn't cut through there? So stuff happens, but we do fix it, and that's a large part of our job is to make sure everyone's happy in every level, in every department, and the studio, and not have secrets get out. That's a huge part right now. The whole secrecy thing is getting bigger and bigger. I just did a TV show, the Fear the Walking Dead, which is a prequel show, and the secrecy, we had shredders on set. We couldn't actually leave with anything, paper that said anything about the show without putting it in the shredder for the day. So it's really intense.
Of course, the general public does still figure it out. I mean, despite all of the things that we do, the steps that we take. I mean, one Hollywood pastime in LA is figuring out these yellow signs over here, trying to figure out what do they mean, because they're usually coded. I mean, this one obviously is Location Managers Guild of America, but often they're fake titles, and it gets out on the internet what our fake title is, and people still manage to get there. And then, as much as we try to keep people away, we still have to deal with it once they arrive. So, Kei Rowan-Young, you were a little bit surprised that I asked you to be on the panel because you haven't done as much in the way of these bigger films, but the job is essentially the same, and Kei is awesome on the jobs that she's done, and so I would like you to talk about what it is that you do on these projects to keep people happy. What are some of the people skills that are required on this job to make this a successful shoot?
I would say listening is uber important. Listening to what the creatives on the production are telling you so that you can zero in and be efficient about what you're scouting for. Listening to the concerns of the location or the community. Listening, uber important. And then, I don't know, the patience to deal with the crew. You're listening to all the crew members who have their needs as well, and patiently explaining to them what is possible, and also trying to explain to the producers that perhaps this may not be the most ideal way to go. You have to, you have to do a lot of negotiating between all parties, and that involves listening and patience. I think those are the number one things that are going to be your best tools. You can take an amazing photo. You can find amazing locations and say this is going to be awesome, but if you can't pull it together with all of the people you're dealing with, whether it be the transportation guy who wants to park all his trucks there, and the crew who needs to spread out all over, and being able to make that happen with the community, then you're going nowhere with what you're doing.
It's a lot of carrot and the stick, and it's kind of constant. And trying to get everybody to realize that they're working on the same movie. I mean, for
Right.
instance, I had a parking lot recently that I got, and transportation always moves in first with their big trucks, and my person was not able to be there when transportation showed up, so they took the entire lot. Well, I still had 150 people to park in that same lot, and transportation just came to me and said, well, you know, we wanted the whole lot. We want to be able to turn our vans around in the middle of the lot. And I was like, well, you know what, today, maybe let's work as a team, and maybe you can pull your vans in and then pull them out again, because otherwise we can't park everyone, and they're not going to be coming to your trucks if they can't actually park and get out of their cars.
Right.
It's a lot of that.
We were in Malibu, and it was early morning. We're pulling into a parking lot, and there was we had made arrangements to have. I mean, there was only like 7 spaces in this tiny little lot, and we needed to be there. And we had made arrangements for all the people who normally park there to park elsewhere for the night, except one person didn't get the memo. And so it's 7 in the morning, and there's this beautiful Porsche or some sort of vintage car, and I had to. So now the bravery, right? Just, you got to do it, and transportation's yelling at you like, I can't, everything's grinding to a halt, and you got to stay calm. You got to go knock on the door, and the gentleman who answered the door, apparently he'd been out, and this was very, very, very early for him. And he was a bigger man, and I'm kind of a small person, and he listened to me for about 2 seconds, and I was explaining to him, you know, would it be all right if we gave you some money to repark your car? And he's like, he misunderstood and said, "You're not touching my car," and he used a whole bunch of curse words, and he flipped me the bird and slammed the door, and I had to go back and knock on the door again because the car was still in the way, and I just had to sort of take it and try again. And that sort of thick skin and perseverance is gonna bode you well. It's something you grow. Doing it, I think, in any job of filmmaking, the thick skin just gets there, and you just realize that things have to happen, and this is not a personal deal.
I think we have to move on a little bit faster. I'm going to ask one more question of Stacey, and then Nick's going to do his slideshow next, and then we'll go to questions after that. So Stacey, being from Florida, she lives in a very diverse region. There's beaches and bayous, there's high tech and low tech and no tech, there's NASA, there's Disney. So Stacey, tell us a little bit about adapting all these kind of places into the fictional environments of the movie, whether it's art department or visual effects. How do we work together with everybody to create what we see on screen?
Florida is an extremely diverse environment. Pretty much the only thing that you couldn't shoot there is mountains. But other than that, you can find it there, which is great. And it works well for us in locations. Essentially, when you're scouting, you're working directly for the visions of the director and the production designer initially. And so you go out and you try to find exactly what they want, to the T. No matter how crazy it is, no matter how wacky it is, no matter how much you know it doesn't even exist. And a lot of times it's easier said than done. So what you try to find is the best you can. The best you can, the closest to what they want. And then after that, when you know it's not going to really meet the needs, you sit down with the director, the production designer, the art department, the visual effects department, and you guys as a team, and that's what movie making is, it's a giant team. You sit down together and you figure out what elements you can add to that specific location to make it fit the visual needs. And there's where movie magic happens, and that's kind of how it works. You know, the art department says, we can add this, and the visual effects department says, well, you know, we can add, you know, these specific items, or we can't really add that. We can't superimpose that. And you work together as a team to figure out a solution to those problems, and you go from there. And it's quite an interesting process.
So it looks like they're still trying to figure out the slideshow connection. So while that's happening, let's start with a few questions. Right here, second row.
I actually have a bunch of questions. I'll start with one. Which comes first, chicken or the egg? When they send you out an assignment to read the script and looking at all the locations you're requesting, do you go to the locations you find and make sure that they're okay to have that signed off? Like, you got the yes from the location first, or do you get the yes from the director before you get the yes from the location? Which comes first? Does that make sense?
Both. It's kind of the short answer, I guess.
We usually have a rough idea of most places. I mean, if it's something we've been to in the past, then we know right off the bat, I can show this to the director, no problem. And then other places, it might be just based on experience. Like, it's a place that I think I can do. And other places we already know to stay far, far away from. And then other places we know it's going to take a lot of work. But we will happily go through the process to make it happen if that's indeed what the director wants.
I think if you're sitting at this table, you know not to take something to a director without a long story behind it. This is exactly what you want, like she was saying, but you can't do it because they're going to tear it down in 2 weeks, or you can come here, but the owners da-da-da-da. So you have to fulfill their needs. Is this what you're thinking about? Because you can't have this because of X, but you can have this and this and this, or you right away know, like, that does not exist here. Give me a week or two to show you it doesn't exist here. You kind of have to play the game. But overall, I think if you've been doing it a while, you pretty much know what's out there for the location. So you do both.
I'll show stuff that I know isn't, we call it either cleared or not cleared. If it's not cleared, I'll show some of that stuff early on to a designer, a production designer, so that I can get an idea of what they're looking for. Because sometimes they'll say, oh, I want a really modern house that has a great open vibe. And I'll show them a bunch of really modern houses with a great open vibe, and they'll say none of them is right. And then I'll show them a really closed, 1940s Craftsman, and they'll be like, oh, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm looking for. I'm like, okay, modern, open vibe, perfect. So some of it's just to suss that out. But once you get to the director, you really want to show them things that are cleared. So that you don't get in a position, which is all of our nightmare, that you show them something that they then take them to, then they can't have it. And then they don't hire you again.
Yeah, they fall in love with it and they say, it's perfect, let's get it. Oh, we can't have it, sorry, that's not good.
Yeah.
All right, right here.
How much time do you spend on the road, and how does that work out in your personal life?
Wow. On the road, depends if it's commercials, TV, or features. Features, God, 6 months you could be looking. TV commercials, they're down to like 2 or 3 days now. TV, the next episode might be a week away. So that's all. Personal lives, you kind of sign off when you join this that you're not going to have a personal life.
I've been fortunate. The longest I've had to work outside of my home in LA was 3 months. One of those was in Florida with Stacey, and another project was in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio. But I have friends who've gone 8, 10 months, even a year away from home. So it depends, if you want to accept those kind of jobs, and if maybe you're single, or maybe you're in a relationship where the person can come with you, or maybe you're okay being apart and then traveling back and forth to visit each other. It depends on what you want to do. Some people just decide that they want to work on television in Los Angeles because then they'll never leave the 30-mile zone. So you just have to be able to adapt to whatever situation makes the most sense for you.
We're good.
Incentives have pulled our business apart. So incentives all over the world have taken jobs all over the world. So that's why it's fragmented.
So this is Nick Carr again from New York, and he's going to run through some then and now kind of photographs from some classic movies in New York City.
All right, if you hit the lights there. I'll do this quick here because I know we're running out of time. So one of the things I like to do on my website is look up old movie locations and see what's come of them. And it's an exercise I really recommend you do wherever you live for a movie that you love. It will teach you a tremendous amount about filmmaking. It'll also show you how any movie serves a documentary function, even if it's narrative fiction, to kind of capture a place at a given time and then see what it's become. So let's start with the most famous firehouse in the world, Ghostbusters Firehouse. This is located in Tribeca in Manhattan. It was filmed, obviously, in the early 80s. Tribeca at the time is really run down industrial neighborhood. Here it is today, looking quite a lot cleaner. The neighborhood is one of the most expensive in New York City. You could see the original is just really grime-covered and sooty. Today, it's been completely revamped, and it's nice. Now, you might say, why would you choose this firehouse? There's lots of classic firehouses in New York City. Why would the locations guys on this movie have chosen this one? Reason is this, I think this. This is one of the few firehouses in New York City that's located in a position that allows you to pull back from it. Most firehouses are on side streets. You really don't get that epic shot. So you really want a firehouse that's in this sort of with this sort of geography when you have a shot like this. You can pull back, you get the full skyline of New York City, and it really just has this epic feel to it. And a fun little Easter egg on the left-hand side, most people miss the Stay Puft Marshmallow wall advertisement on the side there. Just to show you how much the neighborhood has changed over the years, you can see in the background there, it's gritty industrial. The building on the right that's red looks like it might be a hardware store of some kind today. That is a French bistro in the distance, the Bubble Lounge bar on the right, and as for that red building with the hardware store, this is the largest residence I've ever been in New York City. It's not just that red building, it's also the gray building behind it. It's a single family that lives there. They have an indoor pool, they have a billiard room, they have a study. We film there all the time. Law & Order has filmed there, killed a bunch of people in there over the years. But a great filming location. Dana Barrett's apartment, here it is, Central Park West, except here's what it actually looks like. Where to go? Where to go? You look at it there, it's huge. You look at it here, you can barely see it. It's actually overshadowed by the building behind it. And the truth is that the real building is very small. They originally wanted to film at 1 Fifth Avenue, which is a really tall building in the Village. It's got great heights, got a good decor, looks like you could drop a rooftop temple right in on it. And they wanted the shot of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man coming through the Washington Square Park Arch. Well, the locations guys went to the board of the building, as we would do. They requested permission, said, here's what we'd like to do, and here's what to expect. And the building said, no way in hell will we allow you to do that. So they decided to use this building on Central Park West. And it was too short, so what they did was, using special effects, they added a huge 40 stories and roof temple at the top. Now, the movie was, of course, filmed on location. You did have a lot of exterior shots that, still look exactly the same today. But look carefully. Anytime you see an earthquake shot, they recreated the entire first two stories of the building on a soundstage in LA to do this. So you have the real building, but it's got a fake roof, and anytime you see an earthquake, you're on a soundstage. So that just gives you an idea of how crazy locations can get. We'll do a quick one here with the Warriors. Warriors in the movie, they all go to a big gang meeting up in the Bronx. This was actually shot in a very friendly little park on Riverside Drive called Riverside Park. And I think it's a great example of how you can take what is actually a very flat space and give it a lot of depth using forced perspective. Here you see they must have tiered everybody in bleachers of some kind to give it the sense of a huge size, hundreds of people. In reality, it's very little to work with. You can see how they took a space and really kind of made it much larger. And it's good that they built that back wall there, because the real tough gang meeting would actually look a lot nicer if you knew that there was the friendly dinosaur park just behind the gang. I'm just going to skip right through here. Just cemetery is always a fun shooting location to do. So Rosemary's Baby, another fantastic New York City location. The Bramford was set at the Dakota apartment building. Here it is today. They would never allow filming. I have no idea how they ever allowed it to begin with. Here's the building way back when it was built, and there was nothing else around it. A lot of cool design work if you have a chance to visit. But what I think is really interesting about Rosemary's Baby is how art imitates life. In the movie, they talk about how there used to be full-floor apartments in the building, and eventually they got chopped up and into smaller units, and eventually it turns out the Satanists are on the other side of this closet door in the other half of the apartment where the servants once lived. I was scouting a building called the Apthorpe, which is a similarly large turn-of-the-century building, and it was the exact same thing. They had large apartments. They eventually chopped them up into smaller units, and I kind of got a creepy feeling when I was walking down this hallway. And hey, there's a door that used to lead into the next apartment. Now, are there Satanists back there? I have no idea. But big, if you were to go to where the machine was today, you'd find a Pepsi machine. Don't mean to disappoint. Godfather House. Godfather House, here it is on Staten Island. It is a really nice Tudor mansion. But why this location? If you look at it in the movie, you'll see it looks a little different. There are stone walls all over the place. In reality, those don't exist. It's at the end of a dead-end road, and I think this is a fantastic location's solution to giving the sense of a compound. All it is a dead-end street. That's all they did. They found a bunch of houses at the end of a street, and they built a wall. And it really gives a sense of a compound, the feeling the Corleone family has this great spread of land. Why this house to begin with? I would say because it has the huge backyard, which allowed for the wedding scene at the beginning and for his death scene in the tomatoes. Last but not least, two movies that were filmed really close together within a couple years. One is Annie Hall. Annie Hall really accentuates the academic side of New York, the Upper East Side location where Annie lives. They're in Central Park making fun of people. They are in bookstores. This one today is a really expensive purse shop. They're kissing by the Brooklyn Bridge. New York looks real nice. It looks very upscale. They're really focusing on the intelligentsia sort of side of New York. Then you have a movie that was made a year apart, Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver is completely different. Taxi Driver is gritty. It is dark. Here's this same street today, the famous street. In the background, the fun thing to me is if you look, the porno theater today is the New York City tourist bus company. So that, yeah. The porno theater where he takes his date today is where they're showing, or we're showing, Spider-Man, the musical. And it's a movie that really accentuates the neon side of New York, the gritty side, Times Square at its lowest. Here's Times Square today. And I think, I'm just closing on this, what I think is really interesting is both movies were made a year apart from each other. And so the question is, were they lying? You know, one shows a gritty side of New York, one shows a real upscale side of New York. And I think neither was lying. They were exaggerating the side of New York that best fit the story. And to me, if you were to take any of your favorite movies, any of the best movies ever made, they all treat location like a character. And that's just what Woody Allen and Scorsese did. They took New York. It's not just a backdrop. It's not just fire escapes and back alleys. It has character to it. Now, one is gritty. One is upscale, but it's no different than an actor playing a role. And so when you think about filmmaking, when you think about making your own movies, don't treat location as a backdrop. Treat it as a character that needs to be directed just like a good actor would be, and your movie will definitely benefit for it. Thank you.
We'll take a couple more questions. But I just want to quickly add my own quick thought to what he did. I'm a historian and genealogist on the side, and so one thing that really appeals to me about the work that we do, which kind of represented here, is that the work we do preserves the location at that point in time. And like even in my own archives, I've done this 16 years, I have almost 500,000 pictures in my archives, and they're all broken down by place and then by date. And so I can move through those dates and see how places change over time, which is really incredible. But we have about 5 more minutes, so let's ask a few more questions right there.
I was wondering if you guys could talk some about workflow and process and when the location manager gets involved in projects that are sci-fi, fantasy, ancient, other planets, where you might be looking for exotic locations in multiple countries around the world. What's the process in shooting something like that?
So we shot the first Star Trek in 2007, 2008, and at that time, it's more of a software question, would be your answer. At that time, we had to run miles of green screen. I mean, just to shoot what we wanted to input, backdrops, and it was just this huge grip electric crews, just setting up everything. And then when we did the second one, we would be walking with the visual effects guy, and he's like, we don't need any of that crap anymore, we just need a line. So that was over the course of 3 to 4 years. And I can't tell you about this one, but it's definitely changed a lot. It used to be very arduous, really difficult. Green screen was the answer for everything. They still obviously do that, but for going out into a public place, replacing X buildings and replacing backdrops, far easier. It's just a roll in 10 by 20, what fits in frame. It's a much easier process than it used to be. But to go on further, we still have to start a year and a half beforehand because it's, again, for feature, it's a 360-degree view of, yeah, there's the building, but guess what? How much do we have to replace around it? So for the Guardians of the Galaxy or, Star Trek or, any of the Marvel movies, you go to a place and you're looking all around. How do we make this whole environment? How does he fly up? How does the spaceship come in? You still have to do a lot of research on a city, what's allowed, where can you put cameras and all that stuff. And then the visual effects has gotten, I guess, easier. It's just more shots now because you're in the same van, and they always keep saying, "Oh, just let visual effects do it. The visual effects will do it."
Well, they come with us now. I mean,
Yeah, they come with us everywhere.
They come with us everywhere and now I show a lot more stuff than I used to because you might just need a piece of it, and then visual effects can fill in the rest.
And there's a lot of places that we can't normally access with an entire film crew that now we can access with 5 people from the visual effects department. It opens up a lot more. So our job's always changing in that way. And sadly, we do have to wrap up right now, but we're going to be out in the hallway if anybody wants to talk to us in particular about any other questions. Again, this is the Location Managers Guild of America, and you can find our website at www.locationmanagers.org, and also on Twitter at @the_LMGA. So thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate you attending today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.